We are a diverse population and culture. We come from many different places, and it's hard for us to learn that we need one another. We're going to talk about that on Austin Faith Dialogue, and we're going to talk about how we can be reconciled to one another. Racial reconciliation, that's our theme today on Austin Faith Dialogue. Please stay with us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, host for the program, and I'm going to invite you to revisit with me a topic that I had the privilege to discuss with Larry Bethune, one of our pastors in the community, earlier this year, about a group of clergy who are talking about racial reconciliation within this wonderful community, this city where we live. And I have with me two very special people, Patrick Flood. We welcome you, Patrick. Glad to have you here. You've contributed much to our community. And also Lyndon Rogers, a local pastor who serves a congregation, a Spanish-speaking congregation. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Good to be here.
It's a tough topic, and it's also a very interesting topic. When Larry Bethune and I talked about racial reconciliation early on in the year, we talked about some of the goals and hopes and aspirations, but maybe if we're going to revisit that, let's talk a little bit about race and racism. What, Patrick, would you say is racism?
I think racism is an institutionalized disenfranchising of a group of people, and that can be systemic within our organization, or it can be internalized personally. But racism eventuates in the lack of power to be able to act by a group of people, which is endorsed by a cultural group in our society, or the culture of our society. I think that's racism.
Linda, what's your response to that? How do you interpret racism as a parish pastor dealing with a congregation?
Well, we definitely know that race is a part of the human experience, and it's something that in the Bible is exalted as part of the richness and the beauty of creation. And yet, racism, as it's referring to a reality of the relationships between these varieties of experiences, is definitely one of those, as Patrick has mentioned, disenfranchising processes where there's some that have and some that cannot have, and some that can access and some that cannot. In the congregational level, we talk about the sad reality of Sunday morning is one of the most racially divided moments in our society, where everyone is in their own little church and in their own group, and there's just a lot of division. And so I think that this is one of the questions that we have: is this what should be, and is this what can be? And I think that not. That we should have a different reality, and we should not accept it as something that's appropriate.
Lyndon is saying that we could maybe have a different reality, that we might be able to see things, Patrick, differently than the way it frequently has been. Now, you also mentioned that this is very cultural, and I think because we come from many different places to this nation and to this community. For instance, Lyndon, let's stop here and talk with you a little bit. You were born and raised where?
Born in the United States and reared in Latin America. When anybody asks me what I am, I'm Argentine. Of course, Argentina is a country that has an awful lot of European migration, and so physically we're talking about a reality that's very true to the nature of that country. Yet here, of course, in fact, in conversations before we started this meeting, you said, "Well, now you're Anglo." Well, in the strictest sense of the word, perhaps yes, because of my parentage. But in the cultural sense, no. My first language is Spanish. My culture is Latin American, Paraguay, Argentina, and Venezuela. And that's where ministry, and that's where
that's where your heart is, then, right? And your congregation is that? Is
And
that
I'm a pastor of a Hispanic congregation. I preach 80% of the time in Spanish, and we do mix a little English in here, depending on the make of the congregation.
Well, it would seem to me then that if we're going to have that new vision, if you will, and if the Austin area clergy committed to racial reconciliation, that we have to affirm the fact that we all come from different places, ethnically and culturally. But what can we do to bring together then those people of goodwill so that we will not have this stereotype of this segregated society and segregated faith communities? Patrick, what's some thought on that?
I think that race in America is a very complex and a very deep thing, and I think it's cultural. I'll give you a story. I was in Milwaukee, where I'm from, and I had to have a taxi ride from the airport to where I was going. And the man who was a taxi driver had a very thick accent. And he began to tirade against Puerto Ricans and Spanish and blacks, using various. And I was disorganized, or shocked. Here I could hardly understand him. And he had taken on the culture, taken on the attitude within the United States. And he ended up being from Russia, and he was a Jewish resettlement person. Now, that said something to me, that the culture is involved in racism. And that if you become an American, in a sense, you become racist. And that's very hard for us to swallow. People think that it's overdone. I'm not racist, I wasn't around. But what happened in this country really stamps us. There's a movie that was just released by Spike Lee, Bamboozle. And that's a word that came out in the Minstrel Show. And it's a musical. There is humor in it, but it is so serious and so disarming and difficult to watch, because it goes into the media and how the media and TV and radio and the movies has characterized the black person in our society, and under the caricature of the minstrel show. And then it goes into how all of us within society, so the movie really kind of stereotypes all the roles, have played a part. The public relations person and why you say this, the producer and why you say this, the co-optation of black individuals and why they do it. So he has put into a very current art production the cultural racism which is in our society. And to address it then is not just a simple thing of recognition. It's a process, and this is really what the clergy group is trying to do.
And that's why I wanted to revisit this, because I think it is not simple, and I think it is complex. And yet, indeed, these clergy have a commitment to saying there is a better way for us to be. Linda, what's your reaction to what Patrick just said?
I was moved by it, his example of this Russian immigrant, because it was reminding me of how I've worked in the school system too, and how in a playground situation, a lot of times the group defines itself not so much in who they are, but who they are not, or who we do not associate with. And he was defining himself in the example you gave. I think he was defining himself as an American by rejecting this other group that's part of the American scene. And somehow or another, that happens in our Hispanic reality as well. We have the so-called Chicano sector that tends to be extremely racist against the new immigrant, especially from Central America, and tends to be even more so perhaps than the Anglo society. And so there's that rejection as a way of saying, well, but I'm an American, you know, because I hate these people as well as everybody else does here. So it's who we don't associate that defines us more than who we are. And that's sad. I mean, we're talking about a reality that shouldn't be. And yet that is. I'm reminded that Austin, a few years back, by the Austin Chronicle, was declared one of the most racially divided cities in the country. And just how that saddened me. And yet, as I looked, I saw, well, there are certain very visible signs of that, and other ones that are very well hidden.
So are you saying then that we in this wonderful community where we live
Yeah.
are really symptomatic also of what is going on in the society? That we have economic racism as well as religious racism, and that these are realities that we have to face and deal with, and that there is a call of God, if you will, a call for these clergy to speak to that.
I think our congregations and our communities, and especially amongst the leadership of these communities, we have a very particular privilege, and that is to be the bridge builders, the bridge people. I'm reminded of a book that came out a few years back that is The Future is Mestizo. And it just goes to show where we're headed. And although that might not say very much to some people, I think that the mix is the reality.
And what does that mean to you then? The future is?
Mestizo? Well, the author that writes this book tends to present the fact that all cultures that exist now are mixes of other cultures. As much as we would like to claim a certain amount of purity at times, or that's not very popular, obviously, since the Second World War, but nonetheless, there is a certain built-in claim to, you know, I belong to such and such a group, you know. But those groups are being redefined constantly. I almost brought my Chicano dictionary. There's a new dictionary that's been put out a few years back now that's English, Chicano, Chicano, English. And Chicano is a new language of sorts. Well, English is a mix of how many different cultures as well. But anyway, mestizo. Mestizo is the mix. And that's where we're headed. And the church has to enrich itself in embarking on an incorporation. I think biblically that's part of the process that happened in the New Testament too, between the Judeo-Christians and the Greek Christians, and how that process fought its way through.
Patrick, when you hear Lyndon talk, do you think that's exactly what is going on now with this Austin area clergy committed to racial reconciliation? They're saying that the future is in the mix?
I think they're saying that, and they're trying to get their arms around it, grapple with it, and decide what to do about it. I think it's even a deeper thing, though. I think it's really addressing who one is, that we're all one, made in the image and likeness of God. What does that mean? And just to quote the Chronicle, well, LBJ School of Public Policy, and the study this year came out that 60% of the residents of Austin believe that race relations is poor to fair within the city of Austin.
Hold that, will you? Because we're going to come back, and we'd like you to come back with us on Austin Faith Dialogue, because we're going to talk some more about race relations and what we might be able to do to be a thankful people for each other. Please stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue. We are talking about racial commitment to one another and redefining who we are and recognizing that we are blessed by one another, if you'll allow the preacher to say that, and to be able to say that we need one another, and racial unity is that vision which we can have as we are reconciled and celebrating who we are. And Patrick, you were quoting an LBJ.
LBJ School of Public Policy.
Yeah. Okay, and that study was at 60%?
60% of Austin has rates racism within the city of Austin.
Well, how do you read that? What does that say to you? Is that a hopeful sign?
No, I think that's a reality sign.
All right.
I think it's a reality that there is within our society attitudes lingering of culture of racism. And it's a hopeful sign that is lifted up. It's a sad sign in the sense that if we are all one, if we really are all one, then if we don't recognize that, then we're dealing ourselves shortchange. You become less a person if in some way your culture does not enable you to accept the beauty and the distinctions.
Well,
and
Lyndon,
the
that's what you were
virtues of
saying,
others.
right? That we're enriched by one another's culture and the experience, and you've had that experience firsthand.
I remember some talks way back in conferences in the interior of Argentina, where there is a lot of racism as well. The United States doesn't have a monopoly on racism, definitely. Argentines, there are all kinds of jokes in Latin America about Argentines, of us being very arrogant, and there is quite a bit of truth about this. But anyway, one of our pastors brought up the Martin Buber thing, the thou and I, the thou and how this the other person helps define us in the differences, and in the positive way, that is the entirely other transcendent God helps us understand our immanent and our reality here in His greatness, our smallness, and in our smallness, His greatness, because of the contrast. Contrast has a lot of positive aspects in that respect, if we can affirm each other in that respect. I think that there's a lot to be said about a community that affirms each other's differences.
Yeah, and to do that affirmation of one another, as these clergy are attempting to do, first of all, we have to be able to affirm ourselves, who we are, and then I can be open to affirming who you are within that context that you were referring to.
Precisely.
How the Austin area clergy for racial reconciliation, as I mentioned, Dr. Larry Bethune was on the program early in the year, and they had a celebration of racial unity. The Ebony Ecumenical Ensemble came from New York City. Dr. James Forbes came, and that was held at University Baptist. But let's revisit again, if you would. How did this all happen? Where did this clergy group come from, Patrick?
Well, it came the race card was back on the scene. I mean, if you want to be very direct about it, and it has been in the last decade submerged. In the United States, it is back. It came back in the Austin scene due to the dynamics that was taking place in the mayor's office in relationship to racial incidents in East Austin. And there also was a growing development within clergy, very quietly, but going, that they were meeting across racial and denominational lines to discuss the question of race and why is it within our denominations, our membership, that this exists. And they came to really some very profound feelings on the side of many, black and white and black.
And Hispanic?
And no, with black and white in the group.
All right.
The particular group that came together with the mayor's activity, and then out of that came the Council on Racial Reconciliation. There also came a Council of Community Reconciliation, which is an independent. In other words, two groups grew out of all that dynamic.
But so it really came out of the community.
It came out of the community and the mayor's leadership in convening those people together and try to begin to address this. Where it is at right now, I mean, and it's been slow, it's been plodding, it's difficult to deal with. There is a program now called Common Ground, and that's a video, 1 hour video put out from Norfolk, Virginia, out of public radio, public TV, and it addresses the whole question of race. And what they're doing is trying to bring congregations of different racial backgrounds together in a partnered way, and to meet on a continual basis and use the video as a stimulant for the discussion. And when you look at that video, it says some very striking things. You know, it says that our generation is lost. We will never get over the cultural milieu. That's one of the things this is, whether that's true or not, but that's what comes out. It says that we should be talking about our children and figuring out how to deal and relate in experiences. It also says, even the example with Reverend Rogers here in Argentina and America, we categorize things just for distinction, African American, Muslim, this type of thing. And now we are all these things, but that also puts another layer on our differences, and that we cannot carry on a dialogue or a discussion without doing that.
Can't get through the differences?
Can't
is that
get through, and when we discuss trying to be politically correct, we are stumbling over
Patrick,
the cultural
what's your ethnic
tension.
background?
Irish.
Yeah, Irish. You're tough to deal with, you Irish people. I don't know how we can get on.
They have long hate, so that's the problem. They have to overcome.
And we heard Lyndon say that he's Argentina,
Yeah, Argentine, yeah.
and that's your experience. That's where your heart is.
Yes, yes.
And you know, it seems to me that making that step to say this is who we are with our weaknesses, that vulnerability, being able to admit the vulnerability.
Well, in Argentina, anybody that meets somebody else asks them their lineage. We just have that custom. It's a custom. We ask each other, you know, where are you from? Obviously, you know, 4 and 5 generations we've been in Argentina, and yet we trace our background to Europe and what country we came from, or if not, you know, the mix. And so it's almost that we just don't want to let this go. It's part of our identity. And we write each other about it, and we define ourselves in those differences.
Okay, and what are you saying there? Is that something that we shouldn't be doing, or they shouldn't be doing, or is that something that is positive and helpful?
I think it can be positive, and definitely in the church, until it is, we're going to be missing something of what the gospel has to say.
Your congregation, Hispanic congregation,
Very
you
definitely
lead them,
a mix.
okay.
Yeah.
A mix, right?
Yeah.
They come from where?
Central America, Argentina, Latin America, in other words.
Mexico.
We have Mexican citizens. We have second generation Hispanics from the United States, and then Anglos. A few Anglos in there too. Mixed marriages, you know, that type of thing.
And so you have all of that kind of mix,
Right.
and in that mix, there's kind of a celebration, right?
We try, and definitely we haven't got it.
But
settled
maybe that's
yet.
the key
Yeah.
in the whole process. Maybe that's what it's all about, is that we are in the trying. We are seeking to be, in religious terms, faithful to that image, that vision we talked about at the first part of the program.
But there's a dimension to this. We tend to define racism in terms of the physical aspects, with the cultural dimension added on, not so much through the cultural aspects. But now we have some of the physical and a lot of the culture coming in through the Hispanic reality in the United States. We haven't come to terms to that.
And it's changing.
It's changing. It's changing. The population in the United States is increasingly Hispanic, and because of that, you all of a sudden now have, the first time in the history of the United States, the Latin Emmys. And obviously, you know, and then, you know, the Latin crossover. What is this? What Latin
But
crossover?
there is
It's
power
always
in
been-
numbers, is that what you're saying?
Well, there's numbers, and there's also an affirmation of we won't be silenced, we won't be pushed aside, we won't just melt into the melting pot. And okay, so then, but we're in America now, we got to speak English, and so there's the English only movement. You get into all these battles that tend to divide us, and that's the struggle of defining ourselves in our differences and affirming ourselves in the
But I'm wondering,
differences.
these struggles, the stereotype is that the struggles have to divide us. Is the struggle something that we can be called to? And can it be a part of the pilgrimage, part of the walk, that we struggle? And we don't always understand one another. And we don't always relate to one another either verbally, emotionally, but that in the midst of that, we are on this path together, walking together.
I think struggle is a good term, or friction, or energy, you know, because I think it is a struggle. And I think the struggle happens on several levels. Reverend Sterling Lands was viewed on introduction to this program. Okay, he was in the paper early part of November about the Coalition on Social Action in East Austin, raising the question very vehemently about black youngsters being in talented programs. Teachers, okay, he's taking on the school system.
Right.
You were involved with the clergy when we raised the whole question, what is the policy of racial hiring in the police department and the fire department? And then the police chief, Nee, came and spoke to us,
Right.
and so this was an exchange. Okay.
Yeah, and I got to introduce the police chief. That's
That's
something
right.
nice. And I told him whenever I see him, I'm a little nervous because I'm afraid I'm going to get my ticket, you know. But that was a good experience. He came and spoke about
Well,
that.
the struggle is on those issues. That's one part of the struggle. The other part of the struggle, what I'm saying is, and what is really being said here, is there's the struggle of one-on-one relationship, of entering into the demand of kinship and relationship and friendship, and acknowledging what is not or what is in oneself, and between two races. And I think that's where the congregational partnership. It's a long-term commitment in creating a new culture of acceptance.
It seems to me that we're going back to something that we talked about back in the 60s. You know, I'm a product of that time, and we were trying to do that back in the 60s, bringing people together. My first parish, we did that with an African-American congregation, and bringing people together to get to know one another. But then we seem to be divergent from that, and now what do you think, Linda?
I'm reminded of a botanical experience. I mean, or example. Right now, there's a lot of hoopla about the fact that the rainforest is being annihilated and how that means species that are going into extinction. And there could well be many of them that are right now going into extinction. And the point of the people that defend the rainforest is the fact that all these species and these different plants could hold the key to cures for illnesses, and apparently some research leans in that direction. It seems true. What about races? What about the variety of human experience? Are we also annihilating the possibility that the human race will survive the future because we are getting rid of differences, because we're annihilating these differences?
Patrick, we just got a little time left. What's your response? Is there truth
I think
to that?
not only he raised a very real question, I think there's a door opening up to a deeper theology.
Right.
We are the universe. We are the rainforest. The rainforest is us. We're all made out of the same muck. And if we don't recognize the brotherhood and sisterhood and the kinship of the rainforest, as well as the brotherhood and sisterhood of racial differences, we are less a people.
Do you think that maybe we could have both of you come back again? Would you come back and let's talk about this? This is good stuff. And you've been very, very good. And maybe we'll get Larry Bethune or Sterling Lands or somebody else to join us, or Father Izzy, and we can do this again. And we want to invite you to come back. And during this very special time of holiday season and Thanksgiving, let's learn as we gather together with our families to be thankful for the human family, for one another, those around us in our neighborhood and our community, and work together, thankfully, for racial reconciliation. Thanks for being with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.